How embarrassing. We started the show. We started the show and we weren't even live. So my apologies,
Wow.
everybody.
Hey man,
All
these
right, we're here
mistakes
now.
happen. It happens. It happens. It
Yeah,
happens.
how shocking. All those people we've let down. Aren't you embarrassed and like hangdog in the
You
light
know
of
what?
all of this?
I feel like passing the buck this morning. I didn't press a single button. This is your fault.
No, it's all my fault. Oh my God. I didn't press the light. You know, I have one job, right? I mean, not really, but I got one major job, and that is go live.
Yeah,
I mean, this is a live show. We do this show live. There is
exactly.
no scripted anything. All I have to do is remember to press live. But
Yep.
did I do it? Did I? Hell. So anyway, what you missed was that I basically went on a long ramble in the first 2.5 minutes of the show, just telling Jack that it's great to be alive and I'm happy to be up and Tuesday's going to be a busy day and blah blah blah. And then I
Yep.
said that there's an interview tomorrow with a guy called Brendan O'Neill, who I'm really excited to introduce to you if you don't already know him. And he's been on my like wish list of guests for a long time because Brendan is the former editor of Spiked Online, which is a UK publication. He's also a writer. He's written for The Spectator in England, a bunch of other publications. Very erudite and smart guy who really understands not only British politics. He's got a good handle on American politics. He's got a good handle on international relations. He's got a great feel for what the trends are in society, what's going on, what isn't happening that they're trying to tell us is happening. So, all in all, fascinating. I think you're going to find him very, very cool. So, that'll be our interview live tomorrow, which I'm excited about. Kate says,
Sounds interesting.
just one job. So,
Just one.
sorry. Anyway, how are you? What's news with you?
I'm fantastic, big guy. So last night to be specific,
Yes.
the Democracy Unplugged panel finally went
Yes.
live. And it having the opportunity to host that discussion and then at a later stage getting to watch it was interesting to say the least. I think what I walked away thinking to myself was it's amazing how three intelligent people speaking about the same subject could have such differing perspectives. I think it's a really cool way of taking note of the fact that we are individuals living in a society, and the topic of discussion was democracy, but the thoughts were from different points of view. The perspectives were completely unique to each individual that was sitting in that chair, and it was genuinely a breath of fresh air. I haven't seen anything like that in a while.
So I watched it all live, and I have to say that these three guys, and there are a lot of people who will find reason to disagree with all three of them. In fact, I have found reason in the past to disagree with all three of them too. So it's
Yeah,
Mighty Jamie, it's Sizwe Mpofu Walsh, and Penwell, the Black Pen. So between them, these three guys are what I love is that they're all entries to the new world of media. These are
yeah,
not old school, as much as I love them, there are a lot of people who've been in media for a long, long time. Your Tim Modises, those kind of people who really they know their way around and they're very
yeah,
smart and they have some interesting points of view and they're battle hardened. The thing about these young guys is that they've still got that unbelievable passion and energy that you have at the beginning without any of the jadedness.
yeah.
So, you have Penwell, and you were moderating it, by the way. So you also deserve an honorable mention because,
Thank you.
you kept the conversation going. But Penwell, for example, I mean, you could see he's got wild left field ideas about stuff, and he's willing to criticize things that nobody else is willing to criticize. And
Yeah,
I think he can get away with criticizing a lot of that stuff because he is a young black man who doesn't feel he owes anything to the previous generation. It's a hell of a good place to be. I mean, like you're truly liberated and able to speak your mind if you're him. So I love and appreciate that enormously. You got Sizwe, who's by no means an intellectual lightweight,
hmm
and and while all three of these guys have still got a lot to learn, I just love the fact that we were able to bring them together. I think for the first time ever, these three, it's the first time they've all three sat on one panel together. and
Yeah.
just talked about what they think this country could become, where they think we've gone wrong, and what they think we could do better, which is fantastic because then it's a positive discussion.
Yeah.
It's something that it takes us somewhere. It's not just three people mouthing off about how horrible the ANC are.
True. And I think that is the hallmark of the people I find particularly interesting. It's not just about pointing out the problems. Anyone can say this is shit, that's a problem, that, you know what I mean? But if you
Mhm.
do not come up with solutions, you are really just not that interesting. And what 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 I found particularly enlightening was the fact that they didn't all have the same solutions. We had to, as an individual watching that thing, you're going to have to come up with your own answers, I guess, from what they give you. So it's not just about you sitting there listening to what they're saying. You have to also use a level of critical thinking to figure out who's just saying things or who's actually speaking to the
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
I mean,
Which,
there might be nothing that really resonates with you in the first 10 minutes of it, but then
sure.
later on, there's going to be something that grabs you by the balls. Go and check it out on Podcast Party SA. You can find that on YouTube.
Yep.
Podcast Party SA on YouTube. We'll also attach the links to the show notes at the end of the show today. You can go and
Mm,
see it for yourself. But I think it will be interesting. If nothing else, for people who are already going, oh, well, I don't like Mighty Jamie or whatever, because you've heard all three of these guys on the Burning Platform before. If you don't like them, do me a favor. It's good to inform yourself of what smart young people in this country are thinking. I consider them to be smart guys. I was interested in what they had to say. You might be too. Just like
yep.
you're interested in the analysis of, old hands who've been at it for a long time, or people who do market research, or people who are out there surveying the population, political parties themselves. We speak to all the political leaders. What I like about this, these are three active citizens, the kind of people we all should be. They are taking part in democracy on a daily basis. They're interrogating things. They're asking why. They're going back to first principles.
Mm,
It's a good thing to inform yourself. Don't pretend that you already know everything and that you're not going to learn a damn thing, because I guarantee you there will be one little thing that'll pop out at very least.
yep.
That'll make you think, wow, okay, I'm glad I listened to this. By the way, we've also got Democracy 101 today, which I think will be pretty interesting. One of the most regularly asked questions people ask me is, who do I trust for news? Who do
Mm,
I go to for a really accurate picture of what's happening? Because there's so much fake bullshit around,
yep.
and we're all, we're all like, who do you trust? Am I right?
There's a lot of voices, and some of them aren't the most intelligent voices out there. But I think because of social media, we now have the ability to reach out to a million people in the matter of seconds. So there's a
Yeah.
bunch of people from different directions who come up with their own opinions on things, and it can be a little bit unnerving to try figure out who to trust and who to listen to and who not to. But I'm one of the advocates for listen to everything and then figure out what the truth
Yeah.
is from both sides of the story.
Give it a chance. Yeah. Yeah.
Give it a
Pay attention.
chance.
Right. Pay
Yeah.
attention to as much as you can. And then it won't take you long, by the way, to figure out what's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you've got even a slightly critical brain, and you mentioned critical, you said critical thinking, like
Yeah.
just the ability to reason
Mm-hmm.
is, for some people, a pretty tough thing. I think the people who listen to us, the people who get most of their information from podcasting, different kettle of fish, right? I'm going to give the
Yeah.
audience a compliment here because they deserve it. Like, if
Yes,
you're the
they
sort
do.
of person who's sought out a bunch of different shows that you're interested in that come from all over the world, you might find a news network in India, for example, that gives you a much more balanced view of what's going on with Russia and Ukraine,
Yep.
because India have a different list of priorities with respect to Russia and Ukraine. They're not entirely partisan. And that might be the best possible source for you to figure out what's happening in that part of the world.
Mm.
Amazing. And the fact is, people who listen to us here are likelier to have 20 other sources of news and information. I got
Yep.
a really nice, I got a great message yesterday, which I just want to share with you because I love this so much. It came through from somebody who listens to us, said, you guys set such, I mean, this isn't necessarily true for everybody, but this is what Wake Up SA said. You guys have set such a high bar for podcasts. None of the news broadcasts are watchable anymore. I'm struggling to find other quality podcasts to listen to. I've listened to your brilliant ones every day. Please, can you recommend any podcasts? So that's what we're going to be talking about in Democracy 101.
Yeah. And it's I think it's a conversation that we need to have now more so than ever before, because we are approaching a very interesting time in human history. Um, there's so much we have to contend with that we didn't have to before, like AI and all of this stuff. Like there's a lot going on. There's a lot of international treaties that might just be chucked out of the window, depending on
Yeah.
who ascends to the presidency in all of these countries. So if you are not getting the some level of correct information by getting it from as many sources and then figuring it out for yourself, if you're not doing that, I think you're hampering yourself from becoming a upstanding citizen in the next couple of years. It's going to be of extreme importance rather for all of us to be informed in some shape or form.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's Colonel Chris Wyatt, who I consider to be a reasonably good source of information. I mean, I say reasonably good. I'm giving him too little of a compliment there because this guy gets stuck in and asks lots of people on the ground. He's been in South Africa enough times, and he knows enough people in South Africa to have a variety of sources. What he does then is he conglomerates all those sources and filters them so that you can get the stuff that you really need to know based on all of the things that he's already asked people about. So, I mean, Chris, I'll give you a compliment because you're one of those people. He says, take it all in, figure it out for yourself. If you cannot, catch my analysis.
There
So,
you go.
bad.
Yeah, you
Carl
can
says,
plug in.
Carl says, I'm a very critical thinker. I walk around the office telling everyone they're fat cunts. Lol. Okay, well,
Wow, Carl.
yeah. Patrick also saying Colonel Chris is great. He watches the news every evening at the moment. Listen, I listen to probably about 6 or 7 different 10-minute news sources on a daily
Yeah.
basis. And they do change, which is why I never give out like, here's my list. Because I also sometimes will listen to somebody and I'll go, nah, actually this person's gone off the boil for me. Or I feel like what they're doing is propaganda. Because you sometimes get the feeling that they've been funded by somebody or there's
Hmm.
something going on that you don't entirely trust. You can tell if someone's doing something for love or for
Yeah.
money.
Hmm.
And sometimes, rarely, 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 sometimes they'll align. Sometimes you'll have somebody who is doing something for good and they love it and they're able to earn money for it too. But they don't prioritize the paymaster. You know,
Mm.
those people are rare indeed. So you get those. Um, Here, for example, Helen says she listens to the Morning Shot, the Daily Friend, and Citizen Concerned. Very good. I can tell you all three. I mean, we've had the Daily Friend as a part of our lineup for some time, and we used to have their shows in the afternoon. We don't anymore, but I think they do a great job. There's some excellent writers at the Daily Friend.
Mm.
Morning Shots old Rahman, who's very good too, and Citizen Concerned. But I do think you occasionally, Helen, you sometimes have to listen to the people you don't agree with as hard as you listen to the ones you do. Like
Yep.
these guys that you mentioned are all terrific, but you kind of want to know what the other side are up to. You want
Hmm.
to hear the straight up leftist point of view so that you can argue it. You won't be caught, kind of hanging by a thread when they bring their argument, their best argument, their
Yeah.
stealing. You don't want to
It's
suddenly
it's
go, "Oh my god, my pants are down because I've never heard this argument against my position. I only listen to people I agree with."
Eh, that's the point of listening to people you don't agree with, is to know exactly what they're doing. That way you have a more specific way of ripping their arguments to shreds. Like,
Mm.
what is the point of half listening and then not actually having a leg to stand on? That's how you get pummeled in debates, actually. by not paying attention to the person you're listening to. And truth be told, when you're listening to or at least come across things that oppose the views that you have, it either strengthens your point of view or it actually absolutely demolishes it. So you have to listen to as many voices as possible. It's not just about being part of an
Mm.
echo chamber, and that stuff is boring.
But
Honestly,
Jack, you only have so many hours in a day, and this is the
sure.
reality, right? So what we want to talk about, and the reason I'm kind of door stopping you on that one is because we're going to get into this later on. We're going to get into
Mm,
this in Democracy 101. We'll speak to somebody called Camilla Bath, and Camilla is a former journalist and somebody who I've paid attention to over the years because she does know her stuff. And she's now in Cape Town. She's a seasoned journalist, news editor. She's a consultant. She's also a trainer with 20 years of experience in global news media landscape. She will also be able to tell us what the point of view of the World Press Institute is, because these guys look at all the different news networks across the world, and we can ask her. You can ask her all the questions you want to ask her, and we encourage you, if you're in the comments section and you want to join in, to send us your thoughts, to like and subscribe, obviously as well. Then your comment will get priority. But if you have a question for Camilla about these sources of news, so that you can really be on top of what's happening without having to, oh my god, read reams and reams of paper that frankly who has the time for? Because
mm,
news, there's part of it that's essential to your survival, like a very small part of it, and then there's a like a luxury element to news. It's like the only people who can truly pay attention to news at a certain level of detail are people who have a lot of time on their hands. Let's put it
yeah.
that way.
Mm.
So I don't have that kind of time anymore. I prioritize this stuff because I can't sound like I know nothing on the show.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, I'll be the first to admit if there's a subject I know nothing about, when the TV shows that are going on that I've never heard of, I'm the first one to
Mm.
go, I don't know what you're talking about, and then Pumi or Leanne or you catch me and help me up, because I don't know that stuff. But there
Yeah.
are people who are expert and that we should be listening to. So Honorable Dipsy says, Thomas Mabaso from 360 did an interesting story on me. Huh.
Mm.
Okay. Wow. Send me that link. Take a look at it. Thomas Mabaso. Have
Should
you
be
heard of him?
interesting. I haven't actually.
Hmm.
I have
Okay,
not
I'll
heard
look
of
him.
him.
All right. Very good. I was reading a story in the Daily Friend, actually, which it may even be an old story. It's from July 29th, 2023, about the schools and what's been going on there in South Africa, schools and universities in this country, and the kind of nonsense they've subscribed to, which I think is very interesting. And I want to get the author of that article on sometime soon, just to talk a little bit about what's actually happening in South African education, what people are
Mm.
being taught. Because I think there are probably a lot of people in South Africa whose kids are at school and they leave them at school and they go, well, the teachers know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Not sure they do. I
And
I'm not sure that you want to just trust the schools in this country anymore. Not just because the curriculum might be shitty, but also because teachers overwhelmingly have a political bias. And, the schools have become, I suppose, indoctrination camps in some way, shape, or form. So it might be worth getting into this and looking at what actually is happening.
yeah, and when I think about it, like over the past couple of years, I don't remember hearing any good news as far
Mhm,
as teachers and schools are concerned. Like over the past couple of years, if it's not a child falling into a long drop toilet, it's the pass mark being dropped to 30%. It's 80% of grade 4 students not being able to read. There is so many there's so much negativity around what's happening in our schools, and perhaps there's a lot that we're missing. You know,
mhm.
there
Well,
could be a lot of great things happening in our schools, but unfortunately, because of the media coverage at this point, I've only heard negative things in the past couple of years, truth be told.
Carl says State of the Nation is another really good podcast if you're into South African politics. Okay, so guys, keep your suggestions for a little bit later. We'll ask Camilla, and we'll give her some questions if you've got any, and we'll throw in your suggestions too. We'll get to that. We have so much to still talk about. So I saw you wanted to discuss the death of the kind of grandfather of the Rothschilds, Lord
Yeah,
Jacob Rothschild. He died at 87 years old
at
yesterday.
87 years.
Anytime you talk about the Rothschilds, everybody's conspiracy theory hackles go up, and they're like, "Oh God,
Mm,
that family that
mm.
controls the world." And
Yep.
I mean, I don't know where
That's
you want to go,
actually
but
that's
hopefully not.
that's actually why I wanted to go there. So I found it very particularly interesting. Um, the comments that came on the bottom of the article that I read. And as you would have thought, immediately everyone ran to, they run the world and wada wada. They
Mm.
always keep it in the family on all of this stuff. And then I came across a video, Gareth, that kind of fed into the conspiracy a little bit. James tells me that he's got it. James, can we play that video, please?
Oh my God! All right, let's look at it.
Let's check this out. Listen to what he
All right,
says.
here we go. I've got it here. Just give me a sec.
You
Here we
got
are.
it?
And
Yes.
Baron James, who was head of the Paris branch and the youngest of the five sons of Mariam Rothschild, gave an astonishingly uninhibited description of the 19th century Rothschild policy of keeping it in the family. I'll quote to you from what he wrote and make you smile. In our family, we've always tried to keep love in the family. In this sense, it was more or less understood since childhood that children would never think of marrying outside the family, so that our fortune would never leave it. You couldn't write that today.
How
Wow.
were you able to
Incest.
write that ever?
Incest. Holy.
Can you imagine? So,
Well, isn't this how most privileged, in inverted commas, because that's a word that gets abused, but isn't this how most people in families who are politically and economically powerful, rich families, powerful families, political families, isn't this how they all behave? They try to keep the money in the family. You try to
I
marry people who also have money.
sure.
Isn't that how it works? I mean, famously, every medieval European king, and here in South Africa, every king too, because the Dlaminis are related to the Zulu royal family. They are the Dlaminis. The Swazi royal family are related to them. You've got all these relationships that's what powerful people do, is they marry off their daughter to secure an alliance with France.
Sure. That makes sense from a political standpoint. You're trying to um make relations a lot better between those two countries. That I can,
Mm.
somewhat make sense of. What was shocking to me is the fact that he was quoting one of his family members who came prior to him, but
Mm.
like to keep love in the family,
The family.
they understood that as children. Like you're not going to marry outside of the family. I cannot imagine having to make my decisions based solely on whether or not uh, I'm going to keep the family name and the wealth of the family within the family. But I mean, I'm also
Well,
considering the fact that I didn't grow up in that kind of situation, so it
how
it,
do you
it
think?
has to be strange to me.
I mean, the poor guy's just died, so I'm not going to pile on. But how do you think you end up
Sure.
with people who look like this? That's inbreeding, my friend. That is what that is. That's a couple of generations of people marrying within the family. I mean,
And it's
look at the overbite. Doesn't he look like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons?
yeah, he does. He really
Right?
I couldn't put my
Yeah.
finger on it. You just helped me out with that one, Gareth. He does. And like it's crazy to me, right? Because
Yeah.
when you bring up the conversation of incest, a lot of our minds go to like people that are living in rural areas, hillbillies and all of this stuff, and people that
Mhm.
are seemingly uneducated and aren't living their lives
No.
in a particular standard. And now all of a sudden, one of the most powerful families on the planet, seemingly they practice the same type of incest. And
Well,
for them,
it's not all of a sudden. So the Ptolemies in Egypt, Cleopatra, famous
yeah,
Cleopatra from Mark
yep,
Antony and Julius Caesar, and the one who was eventually ultimately defeated by Augustus, and then Egypt, the Egyptian kingdom fell at that point. So Cleopatra
right,
was Cleopatra the Seventh, and her family going all the way back to Alexander's general, the first Ptolemy the First, the Great, Soter, they
mm,
called him, philosopher. Now, all of those Ptolemies, all of them, with just about no exceptions, married their own brothers and or sisters and produced children. And they would marry only exclusively within the family, the Ptolemies. They were Greek. There was that whole there was that massive controversy a little while ago about, having uh, Gal Gadot play Cleopatra in a movie.
yeah,
People said, "Oh no, but she's not Egyptian." Well, what do you mean by Egyptian? Because the Egyptians today are Arabs. The
mm,
ancient Egyptians were similar, but very, very different people, and you can see that by their own representations of themselves.
yeah,
And then the pharaohs around the time of Cleopatra were Macedonian Greeks.
mm,
They didn't even. I mean, 8 generations back, and Cleopatra is living in Macedonia, in northern
yeah,
Greece.
yeah,
So, again, people don't understand this stuff. But in ancient Egypt, and this is not so ancient, we're not talking about Ramesses or Tutmosis or
mm,
Akhenaten or Khufu, Khephren, all of those ancient pharaohs, Djoser and the Step Pyramid. We're talking about the end of the Egyptian empire, the end of the Egyptian story. And those pharaohs, incest was it. That was what they did. Brothers and sisters, not,
not like
second cousins.
cousins or whatever, like
No, no,
brother
no,
and
no, no.
sister.
So it is legal in most countries in the world to marry anything further than a second cousin. So
Right.
second cousin onwards. So you shouldn't really, it shouldn't be encouraged that you marry your first cousin. In other words, someone who the brother, I mean, the mother or father is the brother or sister of your parent,
You're right.
right? That's not on. Most countries, they don't like that. They frown upon it. There are places where you can still do that. But beyond that, it's cool. Beyond that, you shouldn't have any serious inbreeding because the genetic code becomes different enough for it
Yeah.
to result in less problems. But
I
wow,
just
I mean, don't be shocked because this is part of human history. I don't
yo
like
no,
it.
look. I
Acceptable, but it's
it
part of
is
what we have.
it's surprising to me given how there's always pockets of people that do really well and they don't always come from the same family. There's multiple families that could have pushed one another in a very different direction, maybe even higher to where they originally were. So the idea that this man comes from a long line of brother and sister and man, I don't know, perhaps I'm a little bit squeamish when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I found it absolutely fascinating to hear him say that, like to hear him essentially quote one of his quote unquote ancestors and point out the fact that, look, man, at some point we used to do this all the time. It just made sense to keep the money in the family. And it goes to show just how important money and status and standing is to us as people. Like to go to the lengths that they went to, like he legit said in that video that we understood this as children. So
Mm.
it's not something that you were
Mm.
raised, or you
Well,
turn 15 or 16 and they were like, look, you can't just date anyone you want. But like to understand it as kids means that it was institutionalized. Like this, it was
of
common
course,
behavior for them. That's
I mean,
just how they lived.
this is also assuming that your own family are the best people to share your money with. They might not be.
Mm,
They might also be greedy sons of bitches.
yep.
You know, they might be the worst people you could possibly trust with the money because they will fight and squabble. I mean, you've seen brothers and sisters fight over inheritance. We all
Yeah.
have. We all
A
know
lot
these
of
stories. It's all fun and games until the will comes out, and then
yep.
there's a scrambling. If there's anything, and I'm not talking about like millions and billions of dollars. I'm
Mm,
talking about people who will squabble over a piece of furniture. Oh no, but mom promised me that, or that's mine. I claimed it 15 years ago. That means more to me than it does to you. You know how
hmm.
families get. It's not a guarantee that it's going to go well just because it's in the
Not at
family.
all. Not at all. In fact, there are uh, tons of establishments across Soweto that were alive and well when we were growing up. But the moment the matriarch or the patriarch of the family passes, those businesses now are just ghost towns right now. Like,
Well,
and it's clearly because
they,
of the infighting that happens amongst family members.
they famously say that real wealth only lasts maximum 3 generations.
Mm,
It's very rare. I mean, there are exceptions, but it is
yeah.
very rare for money, big money, to last more than 3 generations, which should give everybody a little bit of breathing room because now you can go, well, okay, so if I die and I leave my kids billions, there's no guarantee that it'll still be good for my great grandchildren.
Hmm.
There's no It's amazing how people can spend money, right? And it's amazing how
Yep.
quickly money goes, especially if you're the one who didn't make it. So who knows? For all you can tell, some of the people who are sitting on big piles of money now, next generation gone, finished.
Yep.
So
Mm,
just worry about your generation and maybe the one that comes after you. See what you can do for them, but don't spoil them, and then your job is done. You can't make
yeah.
it last forever. You cannot rule from the grave. And
No, you
the
can't.
Rothschilds are a rare example of a family that has managed money really well. They've invested in all kinds of places.
Mm,
People hate them because they seem to be um, unbelievably gifted when it comes to finance and managing money. They've got houses all over the world. They have just, I mean, that surname seems to speak volumes without
yep.
anybody even having to do anything. In this generation, if someone's called a Rothschild, you're like, oh, they must have money,
Yeah.
um, and therefore people hate them, and that's also nonsense.
It's I don't know, like there's a level of jealousy that comes there that
It's
comes with that.
totally jealousy. It's
Yeah.
pure, it's bitterness and resentment. Listen,
Mhm.
um, people will say horrible things about somebody just because they inherited a lot of money. I'm
Yeah.
sure that for every horrible heir to a fortune, there is someone who's truly a genuine, kind, lovely person. I'm
It j
I'm sure of it. And I'm
it's
sure
just
that for every
odds.
for every poor person who seems virtuous and good, there is a poor person who's a real shit. So
Yeah.
money just magnifies things. It magnifies how generous you are if you've got lots of it, and it
Mhm.
magnifies how little you can do if you have little of it.
Very true. And
That's all.
it does the amount of money you have does not speak to your character, right?
No,
It's just a tool at the end of the day and how
but
you use it.
inbreeding but inbreeding does. Try not to marry. Here's the thing, kids, try not to marry your relatives. It's probably not
Yeah,
such a good idea.
it really isn't. Your kids will not thank you for it. I can guarantee you that much.
Right. Very good. My dad has the nicest screwdriver set. I've told my brother it's mine when he goes. I can't wait, says Carl.
Oh my goodness. Carl, you need to be arrested. Like I feel like we need to be checking out for your dad right now. We need to make sure he's okay.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about some other things that are going on. When we talk about money, South African sportsmen seem horribly incapable of managing money.
It's
You hear
crazy.
story after story of these guys, especially football players, they end up being signed for in this country, we're not talking about the hundreds of millions that someone like Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi might get, but we've had our stars, and we've got people who earn big money in the PSL, certainly more money than someone who works at a shop, and
Yep.
certainly more money than you and I have, and yet they just, that talk about money just going. Those
And
guys
it's
just
not
never seem
it's
to be able
not
to
it's not just soccer players in this country, it's musicians too. It's
manage.
actors and actresses
Mhm.
who climb to the tip top of their profession, and we watch these people make like unbelievable amounts of money, and
Yeah.
yet somehow when that person passes on, we are then told to donate money for the
Yeah.
funeral and all of this stuff. And a part of me, whenever I hear those kind of things, in fact, most recently it was Zahara, if I'm not wrong.
Mhm.
There was some sort of public outcry about how she was ripped off and all of this shit, and
Yes.
I had such a visceral reaction to it because when I was a kid, I heard the story about Lauryn Hill getting ripped off by uh, her record label. And then
Yeah.
a couple of years later, there were a bunch of other examples. There was this guy who used to be signed to Arthur Mofukate's record label.
Mhm.
Zombo was his name. By the time he passed on, he didn't have a cent to his name either. And the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And it pisses me off how just because you got to a place where you were loved by the public, it somehow excuses you from being an adult, right?
Yeah.
Whatever
Yes.
industry
Correct.
you're about to go into, whatever
Yes.
industry it is, uh, be it public or not, whether you're in the private sector or in front of people's eyes, you have a responsibility to research as much as you can about that industry and how the money works in that industry. You don't you don't get a pass just because we came to love you as a performer. No, I just don't buy
Right.
it. And in 2024, we are at a point where we have access to information like never before. If you are going to sign a contract and years later you then turn around and tell us that, oh no, I got ripped off and whatnot, I genuinely blame you more so than the record label, because the record labels have been doing this shit from the beginning.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so glad you brought this up because it's going to happen again. But there's going to be some musician or some sports star who's going
Mm,
to either find themselves on the bones of their ass, or they're going to end up um, being buried as a pauper. And then we're
yep.
all going to be made to feel bad about this. Like it's our fault. Like we turned our back on these people. We stopped
What?
giving them money. No, no, no. This happens in South Africa. You see it, and I'm over it. I mean, like really and truly, just because you earned money once and you were unable to manage it doesn't mean the rest of the country needs to dock up because you've run out.
Yeah, and you get to a point of notoriety because we spend our money on you. Those concert tickets, the albums that you release, or when we buy tickets to come watch you play, when we watch your game on television, all of that comes together and you get your share of that money. It's not our responsibility as the viewing public to make sure, one, that you use your money correctly, and two, if you don't use your money correctly, that we have to now go into our pockets
No,
again
it's
to
not.
pay for your mistakes. We're not going to do that.
No,
I'm over
it's
it
not.
too. I'm done.
It's not the average citizen's responsibility to pay for anybody but themselves. I
Thank you.
wish that I wish we could get rid of this idea that some people seem to have that the public in South Africa owe certain individuals a living, that we need to pay for you and your lifestyle,
No.
that we're the parents and that you're the child
Mm,
forevermore. You could be a
mm,
50-year-old man, and because you can't manage your finances, now the people of South Africa must suddenly help you pay for, I don't know, accommodation or rehab or whatever the hell else it is that you need.
ugh,
Bullshit. Nobody owes you a
major.
damn thing. Nobody. Nobody owes you
No.
anything. And this is, you know where it comes from? It speaks to people who choose to stay an infant their whole
Mm,
lives long.
mm,
People who refuse to grow up. People
yep.
who are like, I need in football, for example, or if you're a musician, I need the record company or I need a manager to look after me and to
Mm-hmm.
manage my money. I need
Mm.
someone else to make decisions about my finances forevermore because I'll
Yep.
never actually become adult enough to take control of those things myself.
Mm.
It's absolutely fine that you get someone who's more responsible than you to look after that stuff. But at some point, you have to realize it's not their job to look after you in
Yep.
perpetuity. At some
Yep.
point, you have to grow up and be the adult in the room.
And I'm not asking anyone to turn into a financial analyst or a
No.
financial whiz, not at all. But
Sure.
if your job is to make music, you can't just sit in the corner and say, no, I'm an artist. I shouldn't be dealing with these kind of things. No, get off your
Right.
backside and read a book. Educate
Mhm.
yourself about something outside of what you are currently doing, because it takes a lot more than just talent and drive and will to be an adult. Like there's a lot of things that you need to balance. Being an adult is juggling 6 balls at the same time, making sure that none of them fall, and in the event that one of them do fall, you have the presence of mind to make the right
Mhm.
decision moving forward for your own benefit. But you don't get a pass just because the country loves what you do. No,
Right.
no, I am sick of it. I'm done with it. Because the reason I bring this up is I think either on Saturday or Sunday, um, I came across this post on Twitter about a former Mamelodi Sundowns player, Lerato Chabangu, who
Mm.
looks a shell of himself right now.
Oh,
And we are now being asked to show compassion and sadness and all of this stuff. Meanwhile, 10 years ago, if you had bumped into Lerato Chabangu at the height of his fame, he wouldn't have spat on you if you were burning. And now, because the tables have turned, all of a sudden we have to be compassionate and all of this stuff. Where was his compassion back when he had all of that money? You get it. It's absolutely insane to me. It really pisses me off.
Shani brings up Tusa Mutaung as well.
Didn't he get fired though?
Yeah, he got
Recently?
fired by the SABC last week.
Mm,
And I remember he and Mamunta, his wife, were both in big trouble at a certain stage. Then it went away.
yeah.
Eventually the tap closes, especially if you're not doing above the board stuff.
Yep.
We have a whole class of women who neatly fit this category, aka slay queens with their blessers. Yeah, spot on.
Mm,
And Mapelo says, honestly, Jack, though those people get ripped off by their record labels, they still access a lot of money during their peak.
yep.
They buy sports cars, expensive houses, expensive lifestyles, all of that stuff. And they
Mhm.
expect it to last forever. That's the whole point. They expect it to last forever. And it doesn't.
It
Nothing
never
does.
has. It never
Right.
has.
Spot
And
on.
it's just a lack of critical thinking. We spoke about this earlier on. That's exactly what is missing in the middle of this
Okay.
conversation.
I want to just quickly change subject here because Keyboard Warrior says Bukele and Milei, that's the president of El Salvador and the president of Argentina, gave awesome speeches at the CPAC. That's the conservative money tank in America. Can we get a leader like Nayib ASAP, please? Okay, so Bukele and Milei, these two are really interesting guys. Argentina seems to be on people's agenda at the moment, for better or for worse. And actually, ironically, that gives us a great segue into today's window seat with travel.co.za. And we're joined by a familiar face, Morné Dupré. How's it, Morné? How are you?
Hey, Gareth, like and you.
Good, man. Nice to see you. And also, Ken Hill is here. Ken is the CEO of Drifters, which is a TourVest-owned adventure tour company. They run scheduled adventure tours across all of Southern and East Africa. He also arranges cycling tours and adventure motorcycle tours for small groups. So that sounds very exciting. How are you, Ken?
Great, Gareth. Great to be here.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Mm.
And Morné, of course, for those people who haven't clicked yet, is the CEO of TourVest Travel Services. Been on the show a number of times. So, Morné, you've just been to South America, right?
Yeah. Still battling a little bit with the jet lag, but yeah, unbelievable.
Sorry, and we woke you up extra early this morning to come and tell us about Argentina. Okay,
No,
so
exactly. I'm in the studio with Jack. Where you?
yeah, no, I know. Listen, I've also got some stuff this morning that I have to, but I believe you and I are in a meeting tomorrow. So Morné, what's South America like? I'm sure it isn't your first time there. And where did you go? You guys went to Brazil and Argentina, or just one of them?
Both, and unfortunately, it was my first time there. So,
Oh,
I
wow.
went in there with like interesting expectations. They rated like us as a third world country, and you always expect the worst when people say third world country.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I thought, and you see all of the interesting scenarios that they've had in the press, especially over the election periods, and you make up your own mind about what you're going to see when you get there. And oh my God, was I surprised. It was totally different. From the time that you actually arrive there, airport amazing, drive out of the actual airport, 9-lane roads, not a pothole, not 1 minute of load shedding, not one piece of litter anywhere. Those were the first 3 observations that I made there. So yeah, totally different to what the expectation was.
So where were you in Brazil and where were you in Argentina? Because I assume, South Africa used to do a flight to Sao Paulo. I don't know if we still do that. I know Rio is the main tourist destination. And then we also have Buenos Aires in Argentina. Where did you go?
Look, we went to all of those places. So, and we'll go into a little bit more in a little bit more depth. But SAA flies to Sao Paulo again, as well as Latam. But what was nice is, SAA is also a lot of negativity hovering around what's happening there, and are they back on track, and are they safe, and how good are they? Let me tell you, we had an amazing experience. The one thing I can tell you about, let's call it the new SAA, and the way that they operate, and Ken can agree to that. And we were fortunate to travel up front. So we weren't back like sardines. But the one thing that is really, really cool about the new SAA is the service delivery. All the way from the time that we got met on the curbside check-in, the service on board, the friendliness, and the willing to want to please that the staff. That's that proper South African mentality that we have. The reason why I love being I'm always going to be a South African, and I'm going nowhere, is because of that. And that was so great that we experienced that type of service again. So product good, food fantastic. Yes, I think planes need a little bit of and I know they've got a couple of new aircraft on the line. Need a bit of an upgrade, but for all of the rest, absolutely superb.
Well, that's a big update because, we're always hearing the negative stuff in the news about SAA and how it's run and all the rest. But I'm very, very pleased to hear some good feedback there. And obviously, a lot of these routes are routes that only SAA could do. So it's good to know that they're back up there and that they're trying to fight for their place and that the attitude is right above all else. So, Ken, what were you looking for in South America? Because you're obviously trying to find opportunities there for TourVest, things that you can run in those countries, things that you could do there. And what kind of stuff did you find that you think might be interesting to South Africans and that you could run for people from all over the world?
Well, Gareth, it's the second time that I've been across there, and I must say I agree with Morné. Absolutely mind blown. We have these perceptions about South America, and then when you arrive there and see that it's totally different to what you expected. We went across firstly to see how they do things, how they do tourism across there. They're dealing with vastly larger numbers than what we deal with in Southern Africa, which was very interesting to see. And how they actually manage the number of tourists so efficiently was, really eye-opening. We then obviously were also looking for opportunities in South America. I mean, Drifters is a well-known overland brand globally, and the logic would be for us to run overland tours in South America as well. And so that was something that I was certainly looking at. And again, traveling down to Patagonia, it is the perfect country for sort of for mobile safari type operations, and there don't seem to be too many of those on offer down there. So, certainly opened our eyes. 4 absolute mind-blow experiences for me. The Iguazu waterfalls are something else to see. The Moreno Glacier down on the southern Patagonian ice cap, an absolute indescribable experience. Buenos Aires as a city, I mean, Morné just said, you know, to travel through a city that's almost European in its appearance, but so Latino in its culture, and you know, totally safe for tourists to walk around in, not a piece of litter on the ground, really, really different to what you would expect. And then, of course, Rio with the carnival, not only the formal carnival, but the street carnivals. We were fortunate enough, we went up into St. Teresa and encountered an informal street parade, which of course we were beer in hand straight into the carnival and having fun. It was absolutely amazing experience. So yeah, I can certainly recommend it.
Morné, what did you think of the carnival?
Look, I thought it was amazing. It's definitely, I think it's one of those bucket list items. You know, it's, you know, Gareth, you travel a bit with us, and you've been all over the world. And if you don't see things with your own eyes and experience it, it's very difficult to explain that to people. Right. You know, television footage and ads don't really portray the real pictures. But if you're there and you literally feel the atmosphere. It's that buzz. It's that, you know, similar type of feeling to a World Cup final, where you sit there and you can actually feel the vibe on your skin. Yeah, look, you know, one amazing thing is they cater for all shapes, sizes, no matter where you come from. I mean, we had Chinese in front of us that went absolutely tilt and started doing the samba there, and guys in the crowd were teaching them how to do it. So, you know, unbelievable experience. You know, really cool. But
I just want to show. I want to show a video quickly of the carnival. Just give people a little bit of a taste. Take a look. Morné having a party. Love it. And then you can see everybody's got some kind of instrument. There's more here. Look at this. Wow. That's one of the floats on the street, right, at the carnival.
Correct. That's at the formal. We were fortunate enough to go to the Winners Parade, which is a parade that starts at 10 in the evening and continues until 6 the next morning.
Oh my goodness.
With just endless floats and party and people coming past. I mean, it is something else. It is just indescribable.
Can you guys try illuminate for some of us, like, what the importance of traveling? Like, you guys got to experience this thing firsthand, but some people are of the opinion that, you know, I'm born in South Africa, I don't need to see anything else. Why is it so important for people to travel?
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, from our perspective, it's most probably the university of life, because what do we see there? In South Africa, we live in our own world, and we like that familiar saying, we believe in our own shit.
Yeah.
So we believe our own worlds, and that's all that we see, and we've got no idea of how it operates in a different environment. So traveling, all the different cultures, the food experiences. You know, people tell you about the meat in Argentina. Well, let me tell you what, eat it and then tell me. It is magnificent. Yeah. Every restaurant we went to, obviously I had meat at every restaurant. It was phenomenal. And not small little bites. Look, for those vegans, you stuffed. Not a lot of greenery around when you go on your field trips. That's quite cool. So grab a leaf or two there. But yeah, it is amazing. So to experience that. Secondly,
hang on, I just want to quickly stop you here, because I'm a big steak fan, and you are too. I know this. So in a proper Argentine steak restaurant, you have like a green and a red thing, and when you've had enough meat, you turn it over and they stop bringing it to you. But the quality of that steak, I mean, they talk about Argentine beef all over the world. Did it completely blow your mind? You've tasted good food.
Look, for initially you think, you know what, yeah, it's a bigger steak. They prepared it to perfection the first time that I got it, and then the second restaurant was similar, and then the third one was similar. So then you realize, listen, these guys have got this recipe right. It's not just the one steakhouse that we went to that's got it right. They've got the recipe right. And obviously, I think it is, one, the quality of the meat, but just the way that they prepare it is just phenomenal. And you order the meat, and then you order your sides if you want sides or if you need sides. I don't think we ever finished our sides because the size of the meat is actually so good, and it's so damn good that you look at the size of the steak and say, I'm never going to finish this. And then before you know it, you have, and you didn't touch the sides. And as I say, well, vegetables are definitely not on the
It's
menu.
not a priority. So listen, I just want to ask Ken about some of these things. So you mentioned the Iguazu Falls, which are absolutely magnificent. I got a picture of that up on the screen now for those people on YouTube. And these are on the border of what? Paraguay and Uruguay, right?
On close to Paraguay, but they're on the border of actually Brazil and Argentina. So ideally, if you fly into Sao Paulo, you would take a flight then down to Iguazu on the Brazilian side. We viewed the falls on the afternoon on the Brazilian side and then crossed the border, which was a simple and quick border crossing. We actually then overnighted on the Argentine side, and in the morning went and had a look at the falls from the Argentine side. So magnificent falls, very different to our own Victoria Falls, which obviously I'm a great fan of. But
Right.
Again, very interesting to see how they deal with the number of tourists that arrive there. And Gareth, one of the outstanding things about South America is that they have huge numbers of tourists, but it largely is based on domestic and regional tourism, which is something Southern Africa doesn't really do properly. And that was an eye-opener for me, I must say.
Sounds amazing. And it sounds like they've really got their act together. Now, I know that TourVest in Southern Africa and in East Africa, you guys have got your act together. You really know what to do there. And I think with Drifters, you'll probably start doing more and more business in places like South America. The other good thing, Morné, you can stand up for this too, is it's not that far. If you can take a direct flight to South America, it really is like a good option for people who want to head into a place that they might never have been before. I mean, you've traveled all over the world the first time you've been there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was, I never had the need to go there because, you always look at things that are closer to home, and Europe and the States are always where you want to go. So it was always that third world country that I had on the list there. Rio Carnival was on my bucket list, but I'll do it when I get there. And to be honest with you, I should have gone there a lot sooner. And next family holiday, might very well be there. And the interesting thing about those two countries is, yes, obviously Brazil's a little slightly more expensive, most probably double to 3 times the price of South Africa if you equate it, and I always measure everything against a beer. That's on the Brazilian side. But let me tell you, the Argentinian side, rand for rand, same value for money. So the beer is most probably the same price. Here and there, you could get your food at cheaper than what you can get in South Africa. But steakhouse wise, quality wise, similar type of pricing. Even accommodation pricing was very, very similar. So Argentina, very, very well priced, awesome place. Brazil a little bit more expensive, although it's just a drive across the border, a little bit more expensive. But for sure, someone that wants to do something different and see something different. The glaciers, for example, was an eye opener. I mean, that's most probably the best natural wonder that I've seen. And of course, we love Victoria Falls because it's close to home for us. But I promise you see the glaciers, it's just unbelievable. It's a life-changing experience.
Ken, it doesn't even look real. I mean, this picture that you've got here of this glacier, and this is obviously in Patagonia, right?
Yeah, that's down. That's the Moreno Glacier, close to El Calafate, for those that are. But you're quite correct, Gareth. It doesn't look real. It's incredible. And the photograph doesn't display the magnitude of it either. That ice shelf is about 100 meters high. You go down to the bottom there and you get onto a boat and you feel almost insignificant next to that ice wall. We were fortunate enough to see a huge chunk break off and sink below and then almost erupt like a volcano in the water. I mean, honestly, one of the most amazing natural wonders that I've ever seen.
Well, to answer Jack's question, and Morné already did, you can't taste the meat unless you go there, and there's lots of other stuff you cannot get a feel for this unless you actually go and experience it yourself. So if this interests you and there's something in this that you want to try out, go to travel.co.za, and there'll be a whole lot more coming from Drifters. There'll be a whole lot more coming from TourVest and TourVest Travel Services. Travel.co.za is where you will find it. So go along and check those things out. Morné, thanks for dealing with the jet lag and coming to see us this morning. Ken, lovely to have you on the show. And we will go and add Brazil and Argentina to our bucket list. It looks like a hell of a good idea.
Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, gents. We will check in with travel.co.za again in a couple of days' time to find out even more. And if you want to find out all about this particular trip and all the other great offerings, all you have to do is go along to travel.co.za.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast.
You know it. Exactly that.
You know it because it largely isn't changed. So it's not an all-new vehicle.
Yeah.
It is a facelift, an update.
Okay.
But the big news is the fact that they've actually added a smaller engine to the range.
So there's no V8, I'm assuming? Is the V8 option?
Still there.
Okay.
So you get the 4 litre, the 4.2 and the
Yeah.
4.5 litre V8.
Okay.
But now they've added the 2.8 GD6.
Oh, so they haven't removed from the top. They've just added. Okay.
They've added.
Okay.
With a 6-speed automatic.
Oh, nice.
So
okay.
now you can get your
An
70
economical sort
series,
of city cruiser.
way
Land Cruiser.
more.
Yeah.
Okay, a Land Cruiser, first and foremost, a Land Cruiser is not built for the city.
Yeah.
I actually had one parked behind me in traffic today, and I looked at it and I'm like, dude, you are so out of place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
All right, it is time for us to get into Democracy 101. We're going to check out what's going on in this important part of our week, where we also catch up with all the things that are happening ahead of the elections. And I think a lot of people are particularly concerned about where to get their news. So, since we've already kind of opened the subject for discussion in the first hour of this morning's show, I thought it was probably appropriate and a good idea to get someone in who can help us understand and navigate our way through some very complicated waters. Camilla Bath is a seasoned journalist, news editor, consultant, and trainer. She's got more than 20 years of experience in global news and the media landscape around it. She's also a board member of the World Press Institute. Currently, she spearheads diverse training initiatives for journalists worldwide, particularly in Africa and Europe, focuses on AI integration, which is all the rage at the moment. Also, broadcast journalism, fact-checking, and that's a whole controversial thing all on its own. She's an accomplished broadcaster herself. She's anchored primetime radio and news bulletins for EWN on 702. Also contributed gratefully and significantly to the establishment of the TV news channel Newsroom Africa. So it is a great pleasure to have Camilla Bath on the show this morning. Hey, Camilla, how are you?
Good morning, Gareth. I'm very well, thanks. How are you doing?
Good morning, Camilla.
Good morning, Jack.
Jack and I are very excited to have you on because as part of Democracy 101, we're sort of giving ourselves and everybody who's joining us on this journey a bit of a crash course in the basics around how, democracy, politics in general, elections, educating yourself to make sure that you're not bamboozled by politicians, all of that stuff. We're trying to package it in a way that'll help people to make sense of the world. It sometimes feels like nothing makes sense. And especially, I think, in a world where we are worried about the sources of our news, we're worried about whether something is true or not. And there are so many people out there just vying for our attention, billboards blasting at us every 5 seconds from our devices all over the world. There are campaigns which are being financed by interest groups. We cannot get away from advertising. We cannot get away from political messaging. And frankly, the news has become a subject of contention, which maybe it never was before, or maybe we were just naive enough to believe it never was before. But it's hard to find out what's true these days, right?
Absolutely, Gareth. And I think the main challenge that we're dealing with at the moment is almost a surplus of information. And the real issue there is that you have both true and false information mingling and mixing and coming at you at a million miles an hour, right? So I always talk about the sort of information cycle at the moment. The news cycle that we always used to was either, if you were in print, maybe a weekly cycle. In broadcast, in TV news, it would have been a daily cycle. You had one news bulletin a day. In radio, maybe it was an hourly cycle, and that felt really fast. But these days, what we're dealing with really is, I think, what's called a news cyclone rather than a news cycle, right? There is 24-hour, 365 publishing. We have information coming at us literally like a fire hose. If you just imagine standing in front of an enormous fire hose that's gushing water in your face, right? You're never going to be able to take a meaningful sip of that water. And you might well die of dehydration just standing in front of that fire hose because it's coming at you so fast. And so my idea around what media and journalism is here for these days is actually rather than trying to add to that fire hose and just spit out more and more and more information, is there a way that we can channel some of that water off to one side and say, here, audience, this is what you need to drink. Take a sip from this and you'll be perfectly hydrated. And I think the role of media as a result of this sort of information overload that we have is changing. And people don't trust the news as much as they used to. It's a fact around the world. And we need to be
I mean, part of that is also the news's fault, right?
Absolutely.
It's the news's fault because so many news organizations have prostituted themselves to whoever has the money or whoever's politically powerful. And we're not talking about South Africa necessarily, but all over the world we see this. And the news organizations that we used to trust in inverted commas, also have become echo chambers and have become partisan and give us the info that we want rather than the info that is true.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there are a couple of things going on there. Number one, the barrier to entry for publishing and for being a news voice has dropped so much in the last few years as a result of increased digitalization, right? You're seeing a plethora of news sources or people portraying themselves as credible news sources who perhaps aren't respectful of or bound by the principles of journalism as we understand it from inside the craft, as it were. So you do have this mingling of voices. You do have as well the financial imperative that's been coming into the newsroom increasingly, certainly in the 21, 22 odd years that I've been in the news, if you will. I have seen a marked shift of this financial imperative. Newsrooms are being forced to talk about money in ways that we never had to before because the advertising model is failing. We haven't yet found a better model to replace that. Everyone's trying a bit of everything, but many newsrooms are really struggling financially. And as a result of that, we have this conversation that is now happening about clicks or views or viewer numbers, and this pressure on journalists to keep those in mind. And you're breaking down that Chinese wall between editorial and sales as a result of that. And I think people are then or there is a space perhaps that's being opened up for more partisan coverage or more sensationalist coverage, because there's that drive, that added drive to get eyeballs on sites to ensure that things are sustainable, and that really starts to undermine the reason for being for journalism, as I'd call it. To me, journalism really should and does boil down to one simple thing, and that's helping people make better choices in their lives. That's what journalism is for. We are advocates for our audience, and our main role really is to try and help people make better decisions. We don't report on a traffic accident because we want them to rubberneck. We report on a traffic accident because we want them to perhaps be able to make a different choice about which route they take to work. We don't report on elections because we support a particular party or are pushing a certain agenda. We report on them in order to equip people with the information that they need to make a better choice at the polls. And that cornerstone of journalism, that kernel of journalism, sometimes is being eroded now as we see the financial imperative start to become more prevalent in our newsrooms.
But, Camilla, truth be told, as much as you have that imperative as journalists, you still have lives to live, right? You still have to pay your own bills. You still have to drive to work. You're going to have to somehow travel between one place and the other. How do you go about finding the balance between communicating, or at least taking your imperative seriously to inform the public, but at the same time keeping a close eye on the fact that you have to get these views in order to generate some sort of an income?
Yeah, I mean, that's the tough question. And Jack, if I had an answer to that, I think I'd be a multi-trillionaire by now, right?
Yeah.
My net worth would be bigger than the South African GDP. Unfortunately, you use the word balance there, and I think really it is a balance that we need to strike. It's difficult to ignore the commercial interests, and it's difficult and I think it would be foolhardy to pretend that those don't come to bear. But I think the real trick in a way for journalists is to be aware of those things, to be aware of how they might impact us or influence the way we might behave, and then to actively fight against that. There's no better solution to me than that. When the reality is that we need to put food on the table, absolutely, but we have a duty to our audiences, and as long as we keep them central, I really do think that we are able then to make better decisions than not.
So, Camilla, the elections are coming up, and obviously political parties, by hook or by crook, try to get coverage. They try to get exposure, because for them that's very valuable. It'll maybe persuade a few voters. We're entering probably the most important election that we've had in this country since 1994. There are a lot of people contesting it. There are many different interests in how this election will pan out. Many of us are pinning a lot of hopes on it. How do journalists go about trying to safeguard the news from politicians who are trying to propagandize everything, and from an audience that probably is already kind of bored with politics and saturated with political messaging? How do you keep it interesting without making it trivial and silly? And how do you keep the politicians at bay? Because that's a huge problem, is the way that they try to inveigle themselves into news stories by saying something controversial. We know how many lazy journalists there are who just use Twitter as a source for things. So they go and they find something that they know is clickbait, and it's going to get the views that they're under the pressure to get for the business of the newsroom to work. And then they'll report on whatever's the most controversial, the most attention getting, the most clickbaity, even if it isn't the most valuable information.
Yeah, so I mean, I think those are two separate issues in some ways. So let's deal with the politicians first. And of course, we're going to see increased rhetoric leading up to the elections. You're going to see inflammatory opinions. You're going to see politicians really doing whatever they can to get into the news cycle. And sadly, as we all know, what really sells is outrage. And so many politicians are going to start speaking in very inflamed language, and they are going to start trying to provoke outrage or other strong emotions in people and in journalists, because that's what guarantees them news coverage. And I think right from the beginning of a news cycle, certainly in all the elections that I've covered over the years, the real key is firstly strong editorial leadership from the beginning, strong editorial decision making around what we will cover, what we won't cover, strong ideas around balance and equity. I mean, by law, in an election cycle, newsrooms are required to give equitable coverage and balanced coverage to political parties. So we do need to reflect diverse views. We do need to make sure that we are giving airtime appropriately to different organizations. That doesn't mean equal airtime, though. So in terms of if you think, for instance, of the ANC, which the opinion polls will tell us at the moment might get somewhere between 40 and 50% of the vote in these elections, whether that's going to be higher or lower, we really can't say for sure. But you know, a party as significant and heavyweight as the ANC, as we all know, will get significantly more coverage and airtime than, for instance, a one-man band who is perhaps lucky enough to get 20,000 votes. Do you know what I mean? So we can't dedicate the same amount of airtime or the same amount of print space to the tiniest of parties as that we do to the largest of parties. So we do have to be quite judicial in that, if I can put it like that. We have to keep balance and equity in mind, but then also be sure to be, again, being advocates for our audience. We have to ensure that our audiences are getting the information that's going to be most useful to them. So it's a balancing act that one has to strike. And I think it's also important as journalists, you know, often what we leave out is as important as what we include in our news bulletins, and sometimes more so. And so there are certain decisions that one has to make about politicians who've perhaps crossed a line into hate speech or into some form of mis or disinformation. And we need to actively work against that and keep that out of the news cycle. Firstly, because it's law, we can't publish hate speech, for instance, but also because we want to responsibly use the position that we have to curate information for people and to make sure that they're hearing the valuable information rather than just whatever is put in front of us. That's he said.
Yeah, but then who determines what is the valuable information and who determines what is mis or disinformation? We've seen a lot of controversy in America around what was considered mis and disinformation when it came to COVID. A lot of what ended up being true was branded as mis and disinformation by the powers that be, the people who supposedly know better than the rest of us. Turns out that they were completely wrong. They were deliberately misleading people, which is misinformation, disinformation, that was coming from the supposedly trusted sources. And the rest of the people who had a different point of view were demonized and sidelined, and very often on social media banned outright for having a different point of view. So how can we trust these editors and these people who once held a position of prominence and of credibility in society when they've let themselves and the rest of us down so badly?
Yeah, well, Gareth, once again, if I had the answer to that question, I would be the happiest person in the world. The issue of trust in journalism is enormous at the moment. It can't be overstated. Around the world, we are seeing audiences losing trust in news organizations, either because they are starting to see behind the curtain and realize that we're just humans, just like everyone else, or they are starting to see in the less scrupulous newsrooms that they are being actively manipulated or misled. And the trust issue is one of the biggest factors, to my mind, in this election year, not only here in South Africa, but around the world. I mean, we've got half the world's population, as many as 4 billion people going to the polls this year. So it really is a bumper year for democracy in a lot of ways. And journalism is really important to my way of thinking in terms of supporting that. However, in terms of trust, we do have audiences who are less accepting of our our reporting, shall we say, as credible or truthful for a range of reasons. And I think the onus is on us as a profession to fight really hard to bring people back on our side. And here, of course, I'm talking about credible newsrooms that subscribe to basic journalistic principles like independence and fairness and balance, and minimizing harm. To me, the only way that we can do that is transparency. The real challenge for us, in a strange way, as journalists now in this digital world that we have, is to become human. We have to become human enough for people to understand that we're doing what we're doing not because of a particular agenda or because we want to hoodwink them or mislead them, but because we genuinely care passionately about democracy. I know I do. And I can tell you that all of my colleagues who I've worked with in newsrooms in South Africa are in exactly the same position. But we need to invite people into that process. We need to be transparent about how we do our journalism, how we corroborate facts, how we will identify mis and disinformation, how we make our editorial decisions in terms of what we amplify and what we don't.
Camilla, I just wanted to find out, like, a lot of professional jobs have got some sort of oversight committee or that kind of thing. When it comes to journalism, are there any checks and balances, or are we as the public, just trying to figure this stuff out ourselves? And if we come across something that is blatantly false, perhaps go to take the journalist to court or that kind of thing? Or is there some sort of a body that makes sure that journalists adhere to the principles that you were talking about?
So the short answer is yes, there are bodies like that exist in South Africa. The two most important ones are ICASA and the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. And these two regulatory bodies, between them, we also have the Press Ombudsman. So I should probably talk about those three. So in terms of broadcasting, the Independent Communications Association of South Africa, ICASA, and the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa, the BCCSA, have oversight over broadcast media, and they are in a position to sanction, so to rule against and then punish broadcast media for transgressions. And then on the other side, you have the Press Ombudsman, who is also responsible for print complaints, if I can put it like that. And so we do have regulatory mechanisms in place. But the big thing to remember is that journalism, by and large, is actually a self-regulating profession. So we fight very hard, in fact, to remain as independent as possible and to not have, for instance, a government oversight. There's a lot of talk in South Africa about the Media Appeals Tribunal, which would be a government oversight body that would oversee the press in South Africa. And I'm not hugely well versed in that, but there is concern around how that might affect our independence and the way we do our jobs. And so what really becomes incumbent on journalists and journalism is to self-regulate. So when we get it wrong, we apologize. If we don't apologize and one of the bodies that oversees us does or finds against us, we are forced to apologize. But by and large, we have to regulate ourselves.
So I thought this was an interesting point being made by Congo Chris in the comments. He says the problem in mainstream media is twofold. Firstly, you've got media houses who are increasingly political and narrative oriented, particularly hard left leaning. Secondly, there's conclusion shopping by the audience. I like that term, conclusion shopping, as in, we like the answer that you'll get to at the end of this. We want to hear your reasoning so that we can argue better with our friends who disagree with us. But we're not really interested in the nuance.
Yes. And, I think conclusion shopping potentially also goes to audience behavior in terms of hopping from channel to channel until they find a conclusion that they agree with, right? So like for every expert, you have an opinion, and for every opinion, you have an expert. And I think you talked earlier about echo chambers, Gareth, and I think people are programmed in terms of confirmation bias to seek out information that shores up their existing opinions, right?
Correct.
And audiences have this plethora of sources that they can go to find information that they already agree with and that shores up their opinion. And I think, there's value in becoming more savvy information consumers. I think we all need a bit of media literacy almost in this new digital world in terms of how we assess sources, how we expose ourselves to information, and how we counter our own biases. I mean, I think one of the important things that I often say to journalists I train, for instance, is we've got to be aware that we are all biased. We talk a lot about unbiased journalism, about objective journalism. These are fantastic North Stars for us, but they're never going to be achievable. Objectivity, to my mind, is a myth. I don't think one can be truly objective, and I don't think one can be truly unbiased. We all come with a set of biases, whether it's from how we were raised, the people we hang out with, where we went to school, whatever it might be. And I think it's really key to be aware of our own biases and to actively try to counter them, to expose ourselves to other opinions, to expose ourselves to information that we don't necessarily agree with, because it's almost, to me, part of responsible citizenry.
Okay, so one of the big examples we have, and we thought that the machines and AI would be our savior in this respect, that these things would give us finally the long-awaited objectivity that we'd always been promised. And it turns out, I mean, especially in the light of a very embarrassing situation Google had to deal with last week when they launched their Gemini AI image generator, which showed to everybody, even people who were half asleep and didn't know what AI was, that even these AI algorithms and the coding that goes into them is hugely, heavily politically biased, and that the people who are programming the AI are as dangerous as if the AI itself were able to think purely in terms of one side of the political spectrum. It almost appears, and Google, of course, has the biggest database of information that anyone has ever had at their disposal. And yet this Gemini seems to have churned out such absolute nonsense that it's humiliated itself to the point where Google have had to withdraw the whole thing, apologize publicly. Whether or not they can actually change things is a whole different story. But actually going ahead with something that was bound to be such a disaster proves that the people, the Silicon Valley people who we all thought were going to be the smartest, the best, the ones who would lead the way for us, they're shown to be just as useless as the people in some backwater newsroom in a third world country.
Well, I think the principle one has to keep in mind when it comes to artificial intelligence, and I've been sort of dipping my toe into these waters quite a lot in the last few years because I'm interested in how it's going to change journalism and how it manifests in journalism. But I think the real principle to remember when it comes to AI is this idea of garbage in, garbage out. An AI is only as trustworthy and as capable as the data that it's trained on, the information that it learns from. And the absolute fact is that the data and information that is available, particularly on the web, is hugely skewed towards a Western perspective and is affected by all of the biases that we see in everyday society. So if you have an AI that is trained on false data, you're going to have problems with that AI, like we saw with Gemini, like we saw, for instance, with Amazon a while back and their hiring policies. They trained an AI to sift through CVs to surface more likely candidates for them to hire. They thought it would be good. It would speed up their hiring processes, right? But very soon they realized that what this AI was doing was handing them overwhelmingly skewed white male candidates. Why? Because the AI was trained on the data of previous hires in Amazon. And the vast majority of those previous hires, surprise, surprise, had been white males. And so it learned to, the AI learned to prioritize factors that shouldn't have been there in the first place.
But that was true. That was true. I don't want them to give me a vision of how they'd like to see the future. I want them to give me what is true. I don't need some college graduate who studied Karl Marx to tell me how they think they'd like the world to look through their AI generator. I want them to show me what the world looks like. And that means if you put a picture of the founding fathers of the United States up, it's not going to be like some dude from Bengal and a guy from the Congo. These are not the founding fathers of the United States. That's just blatantly untrue. It's fantasy.
Yeah. And so once again, one has to be aware of bias. And that to me is the key, is that we need to be aware that AI is as biased as the data it's trained on. And obviously, we don't want it making up its own facts. We don't want it becoming political, if you will. We don't want it leaning left or right. We want it somewhere in the middle, but we've got to be aware that the historical data that it's trained on is going to perpetuate bias rather than fight against it.
But it's not the job of journalists to be fighting bias. It's the job of journalists to be reporting the truth.
Yes, so I was talking specifically about AI there.
And for AI, it's also it's AI's job to reflect some version of what is actually true, not to give us some fantasy.
But AI can only reflect what it's given. It's not conscious. It's not self-aware, right? It can't make a decision on what is true or not.
Well, it needs to look at what the information. Please, I mean, Google, for example, has this incredible insight into everything on Earth. The great, vast mass of human knowledge is available to Google in all of its forms: video, pictures, audio, writing. Pretty much all of human knowledge is stored there. All that Google has to do is reflect, on balance, the very best of what human beings have achieved. For it to politicize with DEI, a kind of version of history that just isn't true, is not helping anybody. In fact, what it's doing is it's making all of us go, right, time to move away from Google.
Yeah, well, I think, it's so difficult though, isn't it? Because when we say that that AI should reflect the best of humanity according to whom? Once again, we are flawed and biased entities. This is a bit of a philosophical debate, but to me, it's a really interesting one that one doesn't always know where truth lies, and truth can mean different things to different people. And so one has to think very consciously. And again, I'm no AI expert. I'm interested in its applications in journalism and how we can potentially use it as a tool in the journalism belt. But I do think we need to be very aware of its inherent biases, and we need to be aware of the biases of those creating the AIs, and we need to be aware of the biases contained in the data that those AIs have access to.
There's so many news outlets that we excuse me, that are popular and some not so much. And how would you advise I guess the average Joe where to get their news from? As you guys were discussing a second ago about the impact of AI on journalism, like how does anyone find any level of truth in the middle of all of this information that's just flying around?
Oh, Jack, it's a great question. And, I think again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I think it's really important, first of all, as a first step for us as media consumers to be aware of our own biases. Yeah. So be aware that I like this kind of reporting, or I like this kind of outlet for a certain reason. I think some of us are more or less aware of our biases, but it really is important to think through them carefully and at least be aware of where your own position is. What is the information that you are looking for? And then in some ways, I think it's really valuable to actively seek out outlets that will challenge your existing beliefs as well. So to me, what I look for when it comes to news organizations or journalists who I decide to engage with, or whose content and opinions I value, I'm looking for firstly the facts. Yeah, I mean, it's almost easier to answer the counterfactual here in terms of what I don't look for, or what really pushes me away, right? So if I encounter a news organization or a journalist that has a scarcity of facts, I get really worried. Yeah. So if it's more opinion and analysis rather than facts, I start to immediately question. If I get the sense that a news organization or a journalist is trying to make me feel a certain way rather than think something, again, big red flag for me. I start moving away. I look for people who use evidence to back up assertions, who include facts, and who leave me to make up my own mind. It's the old principle of show, don't tell in journalism. Don't tell me how I should feel about something. Show me the evidence and let me make up my own mind for myself. So I steer when I encounter problematic content, I automatically start steering away from those individuals or organizations, but I don't shield myself from credible organizations that don't happen to be reporting the set of facts that I agree with. I think it's really important to expose ourselves as well to opinions and ideas that we don't agree with, so that we better understand our own positions.
So the tough question, and this is something that people ask me, and I'm in no position to offer advice because I don't know that I've got it right. But where do you get your news? Like, where do you, what do you, Camilla Bath, as somebody who, you kind of have a greater part of the responsibility than most of us, because people will ask you this and expect you to be the person who knows the most, and you are, and that's why we're having you on this morning. Who do you listen to? Who do you pay attention to? Where do you get your news? And how do you ensure that you get that diversity of opinion as well as all the facts? Because again, these days, even the facts are in dispute. We hear people saying, well, are those your facts or mine? Which is outrageous and ridiculous. I mean, opinions are one thing, but you would think that we could at least come to terms on things like gravity pulls things down. These are now controversial things. Where do you get your info?
So I approach news gathering, I suppose, in a slightly different way because I'm a journalist myself. And so I'm not active on Twitter at all myself. Sorry, I should call it X. I really should. I'm not active on X at all myself. I don't feel the need to sort of throw my opinion out into the void whenever I feel like it. But I do find it an enormously useful tool for passing the news, because a lot of Twitter, a lot of X is journalists talking to other journalists, and a lot of it is politicians as well. And I have meticulously curated over the years a couple of lists on Twitter of people I respect. Many of them people I know. I'm also in the fortunate position that I know a lot of the journalists who are active in South Africa, and so I sort of have a read on in which ways they approach the news, and in which ways they might be biased, and in which ways that might sort of counteract my own bias, if you will. So I curate my information very carefully on X, in order to sort of take that enormous fire hose for myself and get a little channel to sip. I suppose I'm also a huge fan of slow news rather than fast news, if I can put it like that. I like a perfectly baked loaf of news rather than a quickly fried pancake. So I go for a lot of the long form journalism. I find the Daily Maverick, for instance, a hugely useful resource in a lot of ways. It would be one of my go-tos in terms of coverage. A lot of the outlets that I've worked with and for over the years as well, I suppose, in terms of broadcast, would be Newsroom Africa, Eyewitness News. I generally still have an affinity with those brands. In terms of journalists themselves, well, I mean, yeah, there are a ton of them, but I think people who I specifically respect in the news cycle at the moment, people like Ferial Haffajee, people like Tsidi Madia, Mandy Wiener, Stephen Curtis. They're all people who I've worked with as well, and whose thinking around the news I understand and respect. But that's, you know, a tiny drop in the ocean of the news that I do try to consume. I visit as many news websites as I can every day. I watch as many TV programs as I can. I consume international news as well as local, just to get a read on the whole picture, rather than just a picture that suits me.
I think this is helpful. You know, I liked what you said about the counterfactual, and rather knowing what to look out for that you should not be paying attention to, because there are so many opinions about why you should listen to this one or that one. And I don't think that really helps too many people to figure out, because we also have limited time, right, Camilla? I mean, we can't be following 300,000 different news sources. Someone tipped me off a while ago, and I mentioned this in the first hour of the show to Jack. Someone tipped me off last year or the year before to an Indian news channel. It's not state-run, but it's one of a number of independent broadcasters in India. And I found that their coverage of things like Russia and the Ukraine was a lot more nuanced, interesting, thoughtful. They paid attention to a lot more detail than we seem to get in the West, or than Russia is trying to force down the throats of those people where they still have sway over the media. And I thought, what an interesting idea to go to India for news about Russia and the Ukraine. It seems almost like this is not it's a counterintuitive way to behave, but it made sense to me once I saw it. And obviously, all over the world, there are examples of people like that. You don't want to go to MSNBC to see them covering Joe Biden in a positive light. You don't want to go to Fox to see them covering Ron DeSantis in a good light. But somewhere in between, you're going to find people who can make sense of this stuff.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's really about opening up one's perspective and investigating what is out there. I love the idea or the example that you give of an Indian newsroom, and that's because it's operating from a totally different worldview, a totally different understanding of what the world is and how it functions. And I think, you know, there is a big divide between the West, or shall we call it the developed world, and the developing world. And I think, you know, so in some of the newsrooms that I've worked in, my argument as an editor has always been around what I call the Bangladesh test. So if something happens in the US, for instance, here in South Africa, the fact of the matter is that we are very quick to jump on it and report it. Why? Because it's already being reported by CNN and the BBC and Fox and right? And we think, oh, well, we're going to be left behind if we don't pick up on what these major outlets are doing. But the question that I often ask my journalists in terms of whether we include it in our own coverage is, well, if this were happening in Bangladesh instead of the United States, would it make our news cycle? And if the answer is no, we need to think very critically about whether, in fact, we should be including that in our news cycle. So it is worth it opening oneself up to other opinions, to other ways of seeing the world, because the risk is that you get stuck in a Western paradigm, that you get stuck in one particular way of passing the news, and you're shutting yourself off from tons of valuable information and perspectives.
So, sorry about that. Camilla, I just wanted to ask, like, in 2024, a lot of things have changed from what we used to think of them. Once upon a time, propaganda meant the same thing to everyone. Nowadays, things have taken a bit more of a sophisticated turn. You know what I mean? Back in the day in the States, they spoke about ghettos, and then all of a sudden it was an urban area, as if white people didn't live in urban areas. But nonetheless, you get what I mean? Like the subtle changes in language have, you know, kind of made us look at language in a very different way. How do we identify propaganda these days? Because I mean, one term to you could mean something completely different to me?
Absolutely. It's a great question, Jack. I do a lot of training in so-called fake news, fact checking and verification with journalists in Africa. And this is a big topic of debate among journalists as well as all of us here. And the blurring line here that we need to be aware of is the line between propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation. Often couched in this terrible term that I absolutely hate, fake news. We all know it, and it's used very colloquially, but I just detest the term fake news because it's a misnomer.
Sorry, can we?
News is news. Yes.
So let's just define these things because it might be helpful for all of us. So what is misinformation and what is disinformation?
Right. So the key thing to remember about the difference between mis and disinformation is intent. It all comes down to whether someone intends to do harm with false information or not, because mis and disinformation both fall under the umbrella of false information. So not news, not facts, false information. And mis and disinformation are different in that misinformation is all around people who are spreading fake information or false information without any intent to cause harm. So, for instance, I mean, we've all got these WhatsApps from our elderly aunt who warning of a tornado heading to our area, right? Our dear aunt is not sending that on because she wants to mislead us. She's not sending it to us because she wants us to act on false information. She's sending it because she's received it. Perhaps she hasn't done the work to verify it herself, but she wants to share it with us just in case it's true so that we stay safe. That's an example of misinformation. Information that is false but is not shared with the intent to cause harm. Disinformation is the ugly sort of brother or sister to that, that is false information that is knowingly shared with the intent to do harm. And that harm might be to provoke strong emotions in people and get a certain reaction, to incite violence, for instance. The harm might also be just getting them to question widely accepted facts, and spread confusion, so some kind of confusion. So we need to be aware of the difference between those and ensure that we understand what mis and disinformation are and why they're so dangerous, because misinformation spread without any intent to cause harm is every bit as dangerous as disinformation, even though
what do we do with the people who do this? Because if it's your aunt, you don't want her arrested for spreading false info. And every time there's anything that happens in the news, there's someone who sends some horrifying, frightening advisory out. You're like SOS, and everybody ducks under their beds. But we don't want these people to go to jail. They might be well-meaning. And then we see examples of how people are actually trying to influence elections. Let's get back to elections for a second. They try to influence elections positively or negatively by spreading nonsense around about the number of people at a rally, or a riot that's going on somewhere where it actually isn't. And we saw, even with the riots here in South Africa, we saw people spreading, news about this is going on in Midrand. Turns out there was nothing going on. This is going on in KZN. It turns out there was stuff going on. This stuff can lead to actual harm as opposed to making someone feel bad. Where do you draw the line?
So, I mean, I think when it comes to misinformation being spread by ordinary people, just like you and I, right? There's an enormous amount of research going on in this sphere at the moment. And the best available answer in terms of how to counter that seems to be to not take these people on in public forums. So, for instance, if your aunt posts this warning in a big family WhatsApp group with 30 people in it, taking her to task for posting that in that WhatsApp group is a very dangerous thing to do in a way. It's a difficult thing to do because your aunt is immediately going to get defensive because it's happening in front of other people. The best way to counter this kind of thing seems to be to reach out in private on a private platform and speak to the person concerned and equip them with the facts. If you have the facts to counter their opinion or their misinformation, equip them with those facts, because very often you'll see people immediately climb down and apologize of their own volition. Not if we try to force them, because then they become defensive, but often if we just say to them, this is actually not the case. And I've done this tons of times, by the way. I'm on a couple of WhatsApp groups that have hundreds of people on them, and I can't help myself when I see misinformation being spread. I used to always jump back onto that group and call it out on the group, thinking, well, I've got to tell as many people as possible about this. But it always led to a shutdown. And I found it far more valuable, for instance, to message them on the side, just DM them quickly and say, look, thanks for sharing this, but here's what's going on actually, and you might want to consider this. And very often that would then lead to them of their own volition countering the misinformation that they have spread. When it comes to bad actors, shall we call them, so people who are spreading disinformation and doing it intentionally, well, then I think we're seeing increased legislation around how to deal with these bad actors developing around the world. And I think it needs to get harsher. And I think the consequences need to be clear, that if you actively try to mislead people or harm them in some way, that there must be consequences and you must be held to account.
So, Camilla, according to you, what does the future of journalism look like? I mean, recently, Fox News got into a lot of trouble about the 2020 elections, saying that I think they came out and said that the election was stolen and they were taken to court as a result, and they lost the case recently. And including the fact that a lot of people have become a bit disillusioned with especially big media companies, where, we don't always just trust when they say something. I mean, back in the day, we had 3 channels, and we just trusted that what was said in the bulletin would be true. Or whenever you'd pick up a newspaper like Sowetan or City Press or whatever it might be, whatever it is that you were reading, you would immediately assume that it was true. But over the years, the veil has kind of been removed from our eyes, and we've seen just how muddled media can be when it comes to their alliance with the truth and their alliance with their money interests. What does the future of journalism look like?
Yeah, so Jack, I think when we look, I mean, I can gaze into my crystal ball.
Sure.
I'm not sure that I've got all the answers, but there are certain things that we're seeing that I think are valuable to keep in mind. Number one is a pulling away from mass media. So there's a big discussion going on in the media fraternity at the moment globally around people's pulling away from mass media and their interest more and more in local media. And I do wonder whether we're going to see the re-emergence of local media, which we know has been dying off for the last 20 or 30 years. I hope in a way that we see hyper-local media coming back. I think one of the big things that we've lost as the media and as newsrooms is a connection with our audiences, a real connection with them. We had that for so long in many of the newsrooms that I've worked in, but that seems to be failing now. And I think in order for journalism to really function properly, we need to be deeply committed to, embedded in, and connected with our audiences. And we can't do that if we're trying to cater to everyone all the time. And so I do wonder if the future of journalism is a more localized and perhaps a hyper-localized newsroom that reports on a specific community. I do also think that, and we're seeing it already, we're shifting more into a curation role. We are curators of news, we are amplifiers of news rather than the originators of news, right? It breaks on X before it breaks anywhere else. We are no longer the gatekeepers of facts. and media. But I do think that we are now in a position where we need to increasingly amplify valuable voices and underheard voices, and we need to curate the news for people and make it digestible and easy for them to understand it. And again, it's about very consciously thinking about how we serve our audiences. So I'll take it back to where we started. I think journalists exist to cater to their audiences. They exist to be advocates for their audiences, and journalism exists to help people make better decisions in their lives. And I think perhaps that this re-emergence of local news is an answer. I don't know about the answer, but to me, it seems to be a plausible answer.
Well, I saw a story in the news about Facebook and Instagram owner Meta that has said that they'll form a team to tackle deceptive AI in upcoming EU elections in June. It's concerned by how generative AI, which can create fake videos, images, and audio, might be used to trick voters. And that's a whole other thing. When you talk about fake news, how about just this complete deep fake situation we've got, where you see someone who you do trust, someone who you think you know, and they're telling you that you've got to buy this crypto coin or something, and you know it's complete nonsense. Now, those people could easily, those people who are doing this stuff, could easily turn their nefarious skills to, having someone who people respect and love endorse something truly horrible in politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're already seeing it in South Africa, by the way. I worked for a long time with a journalist called Francis Hurd. And Francis, if anyone watches the SABC, is a well-known anchor on the SABC. And she was essentially cloned. Someone used an AI to create an avatar of her and was able, because of the amount of footage that's publicly available of her, to perfectly clone her face and her voice and get her to endorse products that Francis, I don't think, having known her, would ever endorse, for instance. We are already seeing this kind of sophisticated technology in South Africa and being weaponized in South Africa. And AI is going to be a big differentiator in a lot of the elections that we're going to see around the world this year. It is quite terrifying in some ways. And the problem is that we don't actually have the tools yet to properly counter this kind of thing. So you do have some AI programs that can detect AI created elsewhere. Gemini, for instance, for all its failings, does seem to be able to detect if a video has been made with Sora, which is OpenAI's new generative video program, which is startling if you watch it. So we do have this almost cat and mouse game where we have a sophisticated AI able to create deep fakes. They are a reality and we need to be very aware of them. And then you have another AI playing catch up that might be able to detect these. But it's a cat and mouse game at the moment.
Yeah, it's a rock and a hard place. I believe Denzel Washington said it best, that if you read the news, you are misinformed. If you don't read the news, you are uninformed. It's such a weird thing to navigate. It's weird. It is so weird.
That. Yeah, you choose your poison. Which would you prefer to be?
It almost makes a case for the blissfully ignorant who keep their heads in the sand. But I'm glad that you were able to help us wade through some of this very, very difficult material, because it is hard for most of us to understand. And I think maybe I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll figure out a way of discerning in more direct and less labor-intensive ways what is true and what is not. But journalists have played their part in the past. The fourth estate is important. We want people to be able to challenge power, to be able to report honestly about what's going on, and not to be influenced by the money and power of so many in society who wish to fill our daily feed with nonsense and with narrative. So I thank you, Camilla. It's really good to have someone who is informed and helpful on this matter. And I hope we'll talk to you again soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jack and Gareth, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Camilla
Camilla.
Bath, everybody. Very, very cool. And we will be back tomorrow at 6 a.m. for our special interview. You can check out that and a whole lot more on cliffcentral.com. Also, don't forget, if you haven't seen it already, to go and watch the Podcast Party's special Democracy Unplugged. You can find it on YouTube at Podcast
sir.
Party SA. That's featuring Mighty Jamie, featuring Penwell the Black Pen, and Sizwe Mpofu Walsh, and our moderator, Jack Motlante, who is on your screen right now. Check that out and a whole lot more. We will see you tomorrow. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers.